Hello, hello, and welcome everyone to In Time. My name is Nicholas Lamar Soutter. Thank you for joining us. And today we have Courtney Stewart with us, although her camera is off. So I will fix that in just one moment. My apologies there. And then also we have Christopher. Chris, are you wearing a coat? No, you can stay muted.
I would like to signal to everybody that I'm taking this shit seriously. got myself a nice jacket, color matched, right? I got the blue with the blue, accented with the yellow of Schoolhouse Rock. Wearing my glasses, so that you know I'm fucking serious. So I'm ready. I'm a serious man. I'm to be taken seriously.
I'm
a grown-ass man.
Okay, I believe you. Let me. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over. We're going to have Courtney's camera on the other side. There you are, Courtney. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Good to see you. I'm glad that I was almost on time this time. I don't know why we had. Christopher on yesterday, and we decided to bring him back. I don't know why. We have a very good question. We have a good question from the audience here. Is it a $400 suit? I think that's a very fair question. So let's see. We have coming up on Tuesday, we're going to have on a discussion between myself and a Xandering person on gun control. That is one that we were supposed to do like 6 months ago, and we're finally getting around to. He and I have both been very busy, so I'm really looking forward to that one. And then we also have on the 21st at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we have Osmandius and Dr. Richard Carrier on to discuss the philosophy of religion. So I think that should be a good one. Last time we had Dr. Carrier on, we told him we'd get that sorted, get that all worked out, and I think that's going to be a lot of fun. I'm not sure if the two of them have ever streamed together, so I think that's going to be...
Is it the philosophy of religion or the philosophy of science?
Philosophy of religion, but we're going to... no, I'm sorry, you're right. I think, I have it down philosophy of religion. I think that's a really... I think we have philosophy of religion, but he had made the argument that philosophy of science started from, religion. Of course, religion was man's first attempt at science, and then science sort of separated out from it. And last time we had on Ozzy, because we have a regular series on philosophy, one of the things that Ozzy says is philosophy is everything that's left over. So everything starts with philosophy, and then it sort of niches down to another area, and then breaks off from philosophy and formalizes in some other way, and then it's no longer philosophy, it's whatever, it becomes law, it becomes science, whatever it becomes. And so I think I have it down as, I'll have to double check, I have it down as philosophy of religion, and I think that's where we're going to start. We already did philosophy of science, I think, with Dr. Carrier. So we'll figure it out. I think it's philosophy of religion.
Okay, rock on. I'm looking forward to it, regardless.
As the host, you'd think I'd know, but don't tell them. I got no idea. We just finished booking it, so Christopher, we had you on yesterday, and we were discussing 3 studies that came out that were discussing correlations between what programs certain viewers watched and the infection rates on COVID. So whether the information that they were getting was somehow influencing their action, and or whether they had actions that were influencing what they were watching, and there was a correlation. So we discussed a number of those, and I think today we were going to finish with the 3rd one, and then discuss what maybe some concerns are regarding those studies. If I remember correctly, is that you think an accurate representation of what we do? He started with this suit too. This is we're going to have issues today.
We are in for a devious hang. because I was able to access that article that had the critiques against the very articles that we are reviewing today and reviewed yesterday. And it's
did you
breath of fresh air, the way that this guy just breaks shit down. I'm so looking forward to continuing the walk down the rosy path, only to find this thorn bush. It's fucking awesome. Can't wait. I can't wait.
All right, marvelous. Just out of curiosity, did you successfully? Was at least one of the objections the one that you had predicted in regards to how much they had hedged everything and
the last thing I want to do is engage in hindsight bias, so I will leave it up to you as a more objective observer of my behaviors, and as we're listing them, you can, from your memory, and also it's recorded, so people can review yesterday's episode, determine what problems I had, and line them up with the critiques of this particular gentleman, and see. I don't want to brag out of place. A couple of them seem very adjacent. A couple of the critiques seem very in line with some of the things that I said yesterday, but I don't think I nailed any of them perfectly.
Well, we can do that, and I'm happy to do that, but truth be told, I really don't pay much attention when you talk anyway, so, I mean, it's going to be mostly hit or miss as to whether or not you actually said any of these things, but okay, fine.
And that's why I really appreciate, Courtney, that you allow me on the show. I don't exactly know why you left me alone with your co-host, Nick, yesterday.
I'm so sorry.
He's the co-host for a reason, right? He's doing a subpar job, and it's a meritocracy. But, I did the best that I could.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was stressful for him last time.
I had some clients scheduled at that time, so I couldn't come. But I'm sorry I missed the conversation. It seemed really interesting. It's like right in my wheelhouse, like you said.
Yeah, it's super fun. So, Do you have anything to promote before we get started? Anybody? Going once, going twice?
KERA.
Right on.
KERA.org. Donate.
And so what is that? Just a...
Well, KERA is the local Texas channel of NPR. Nice. Donate to NPR is really the... I became a sustaining member a while back, and I've got this BBC KERA. So KERA is the local channel of NPR, but basically support independent news. Support NPR.
Absolutely, I listen to it constantly,
Love
and
it.
for the price of a cup of coffee, you can support your local public radio station.
Right.
And what about you, Nick? You have anything fun coming up?
Just what we have on the show that I was talking about. I would like to get back to doing some of my own content on my own channel. I've done a few things there, and I used to do a lot of debates and stuff like that. I haven't had time. The show takes up a good deal of my time right now, but I'm looking forward to doing it once I'm my any free time I get right now. It's family. And then after that, it's going to be doing my own channel some more, and going on some other people's channels. I was on ProLib to discuss Star Trek, and that was actually a really good. I think he thought I couldn't bring it, but
I was there. I was there in the side chat. I was just like, both of these guys are hacks.
Okay. All right. No, you know what? We're starting.
I'm an equal opportunity insulter. That's what I just. I can throw bombs on both sides, man. That's all I'm saying. I am the DMZ.
Why don't you start your presentation, and let's take a really good look at what you have to say today. I think this is going to be a really interesting show.
Yeah, I think it's going to be fun. So check it out. Before we begin, as I was saying off camera, I appreciate that you're making space for these kinds of conversations. This is super fun for me. And as somebody who just doesn't have the gumption to provide content on my channel, it's nice that I can just walk in, have these conversations, have you do all the hard work, and then bounce. It's great. It's like the uncle effect with kids.
I'll
feed him caffeine and sugar, and then hand him back to my brother.
That's my entire YouTube career, is like, other people knowing a lot more about production and how to do that, and I just go on and talk about things and go home. And people seem to want to watch it, which is great.
Nice. So, I love the fact that we can have these conversations. Super fun.
Absolutely.
All right. So let's review what we went over yesterday, super quickly. started going over the idea that, hey, are we in the midst of an infodemic, as evidenced by misinformation being provided during COVID-19 pandemic? And this was inspired by an article, the article on the right, that was, I believe it was published on Monday, and it's an opinion piece based on this analysis piece that a colleague of Margaret Sullivan's did on Friday, Christopher Ingram. And he specifically mentions 3 articles. And so I have the main points of those 3 articles here, and giving it steel manning the argument that's being made. I kind of have a visual representation of what's going on here. Everything's bottlenecking. It starts with misinformation existing in the media, but mostly on social media like Twitter as compared to national media. And then another article that says, oh, but wait, there's more. If you unpack the national media, depending on the channel that you watch, you could be getting more misinformation than if you watched a different channel. And then further to bottleneck, and of course Fox is the misinformation target of the second article, which I laid out my critiques of yesterday. And then finally, there's a study that goes, oh, but wait, there's more. Not only is it Fox, but of the shows on Fox, the show Hannity and its viewership gets more misinformation than, say, Tucker Carlson. So, giving it the most steel-manny version of the argument that I could, I laid out this graphic where it starts general with media misinformation and then bottlenecks exactly towards Hannity, with Hannity on the Fox News Network in the crosshairs. So today we're going to review the third of the 3 articles, and just to review, the first article just made the claim that exposure to social media is associated with more misperceptions and less social distancing compliance compared to news media, right? And they're using Twitter as their endpoint, and or a qualitative analysis of Twitter as their endpoint. And then the persuasive effect of, I still haven't corrected this typo, Fox viewership on social distance compliance is quite large, is the main point of the second article. This second article, I very much think, is a bunch of Freakonomics fanboys trying to pull together obtuse variables in a way that makes maybe a point. So that was my critique in a nutshell. And then today we're going to go over this one here. The greater exposure to Hannity relative to Tucker Carlson tonight increases the behavior of total cases and deaths in initial stages of the coronavirus pandemic. All right. So slides, graphs, talky, meow, meow. And then we land.
I like my house.
Meow. So, misinformation during a pandemic. This is also, this second article here, this is a working paper, as is this third paper. This first paper was actually published and peer-reviewed. So, neither of these have gotten published yet because they're working it, and this has. So just to make it clear the difference, because that's an important distinction, right? It's not some slippery slope argument, and it's not like some bullshit poisoning the well argument. It's just like papers that haven't been through the peer review process haven't jumped that hurdle, and that hurdle is in place as a firewall to protect us against ourselves, right? That's the joy of psychology, right? This is social science, but it kind of has psychological components, and my pet phrase for psychology is the best part about psychology being a science is that it's able to study the mind without falling into the traps of the mind. So, that being said, this is a working paper called Misinformation During a Pandemic. So, they did a qualitative analysis, and to start off with, just to be like, okay, of the shows on Fox News, let's take a look at the 2 most popular and then just like basic viewership. And you can see mentioning of, and the x-axis is time, and then the y-axis is their metric, the log count, the log word count of how often COVID-19 was mentioned. And you can see Tucker Carlson has a lot more than Hannity, the mentions, and then they had a separate analysis about how serious it was taken when it was mentioned. And Tucker Carlson, again, is, I don't know if it's significantly different, but it certainly looks like it, right? As compared to Hannity. And Hannity is this dotted line down here. So that's their first. That's what they're opening with. They're like, hey, Fox News, depending on what show you watch, will give you different levels of misinformation about COVID-19, either by not mentioning it, omitting, or when mentioning it, committing the error of downplaying it, right? So both sides of the omit-commit ways that you can deceive. Second point that they make is the viewers of Hannity changed their behavior 4 to 5 days later than viewers of other shows. And that P is just P is another way of determining probability. It's called the alpha level. And the number that it represents determines the confidence with which probability determines that your results are above chance. So the normal alpha level is 0.05. That gives you a 95% confidence level. 0.01 is the second level of alpha that's usually used, and that's a 99% level of confidence. And then this is an even more stringent and conservative alpha level of P being less than 0.001, which gives you a 99.9% probability in confidence that your results are not due to chance. That being said, thank you for listening to my statistics talk. So
I'm following it because I took the class on it, but I don't know. I think you got it.
And I have it in such a Gish Gallop fashion because it's how I lecture it. So it's just like, all right, I know that you guys are going to hate this, but let me put it to you in as palatable ways possible. Here we go. So I have nice little bumper sticker versions of explaining stats. All right. Tucker Carlson viewers changed their behaviors 3 to 4 days earlier than viewers of other shows. And as I mentioned before, this is a less stringent criteria, but it's still significant, 0.01, 99% confidence. And the difference in coefficients is also statistically significant. They had a graph that represented this, but I didn't think that it was a good graph. And I know that tables are less user-friendly than graphs, but I did want to demonstrate, like the things that they're claiming are shown in these graphs, right? So these are actual days. So like 4.5 days after the official announcement of an emergency, Hannity watchers changed their behaviors as compared to about 3.5 days previous to it being labeled an emergency is when the Carlson viewers changed their behavior. So, and then these are very different measures. Like, did they change their behavior, right? So this is, the metric is days here, and here is, did they change their behavior before March 1st, which is before it was officially announced, and Hannity viewers didn't, and Carlson watchers did. And then on the day that it was announced, March 15th, Hannity watchers didn't, Carlson watchers did. And then 15 days after it was announced, Hannity watchers are not, in a way that Carlson watchers are, changing their behaviors.
So. Now the fact that the Carlson viewers changed their behaviors, it looks like ahead of time, based on what he was doing.
Before it was announced before it was officially announced as a state of emergency, Carlson watchers, to their credit, Carlson watchers, or to his credit maybe, right?
Well, that's why I'm bringing it up. So my question is, when did he announce that it was versus so either they're getting information from somewhere in addition to watching Carlson, or he was aggressive about it beforehand. I'm just curious as to which it is.
I think that's what these graphs demonstrate, right? So an actual word count, a qualitative analysis of both broadcasts, this thick blue line here is how frequently Tucker Carlson mentioned COVID as early as January 15th, a little after, right? And it plateaus at around let's say between the middle of January and the beginning of February, right? So he's mentioning it, and this also demonstrates how seriously he's taking it. That's what this graph demonstrates. So absolutely, it was being mentioned by Hannity, but it was also not being taken seriously. So I think this might have some answers to the questions that you're bringing up.
Yep.
Like he definitely he was definitely talking about it earlier and talking about it as a serious thing to consider earlier. So that you would think that those beliefs would manifest in behaviors about compliance and social distancing. At least that's what I think these authors are trying to go with.
Right.
And it makes sense from a logical perspective, right? Behaviors usually follow from beliefs. Or maybe more appropriately, beliefs are the precipitating event to certain behaviors.
Or,
trying to be as neutral as possible.
Or to changes. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, we could fucking split that hair 17 ways,
right? All right. So next week on In Time, we're gonna spend 2 hours
wrap it up.
splitting one hair
fucking
off.
Kane comes and pulls me off. Like, wait a second, I'm not done yet.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. So let's finish this up because he only has one more point. And that point is, taken together, their evidence suggests that the higher viewership of Hannity relative to Tucker Carlson is associated with a greater number of COVID-19 cases and deaths, because they admitted, which was fantastic, right, that this correlation could be due to, it could fall prone to the problems with correlational analyses, which is the directionality, right? You don't know in which direction the association is working, A to B or B to A. And you also don't know if there is an unknown variable that is accounting for both of those, for that association between those variables, right? This is the correlation does not mean causation mantra in statistics. So they admit it. They're like, hey, man, this might just be something that is, what's the word I want to use? It is the product of a correlational analysis, and we're not able to determine causality. So then they look at COVID infection rates and death rates as a way of like trying to slice through the fact that it's correlational analysis, even though this isn't particularly an experiment, which is the real way that you can determine causality. But let's not get into that. So here they have COVID cases on top and COVID deaths on this bottom table here. And they made one variable out of the difference between Hannity-Carlson viewership. And you can see, and these are dates, the significance of the difference between the viewership having an effect on COVID cases here, with 2 asterisks meaning alpha level of 0.05, 3 asterisks meaning an alpha level of 0.1 is 2 asterisks, and 3 asterisks is 0.001. And then down here, as you would predict, right, 2 weeks later, approximately, these are these categories, these boxes are 1 week's worth of information. Down here, 2 weeks later, after the COVID cases are confirmed, we start seeing the deaths. So,
now why is it 2 weeks?
Go ahead.
I was asking you why it was 2 weeks.
What's that?
I was asking why it was 2 weeks.
I think that is the 2 to 3 weeks is the general lag between confirmed cases and deaths. Right. I think it's just a given. I mean, I've heard that.
It's like 2 weeks. 2 weeks from the diagnosis to the time the person actually dies.
Yes. All right. So, and of course, this is data on populations. So we're looking at trends in a population, not necessarily individuals.
Yeah. No, I wanted our audience to know. We bring up that number a lot. I get frustrated by that 2 weeks because that causes a lot of misinformation. I think that's why so many. I think people have a hard time processing that 2 week lag. There's a lag both between when an action is taken in response to COVID and when you see the results from that action, and then of course when the numbers come in and when the deaths occur. There's a lag between both of those things. So death rates are still not skyrocketing in the same way that infection rates are. Yeah, but it will, and that can't be stopped. We could go into lockdown right now. It will not stop the infection rates for 2 weeks, and it won't stop the death rates from going up for 2 weeks because of that lag. So.
For 2 weeks after that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So it's frustrating, and I think that's why people have a hard time responding to it. We don't do well with lags like that. We just don't.
People are shitty with delayed gratification, right? Impulse control. Yep. All guilty as charged, right? As humans, we're bad at that. So, I mean, that's a drag. That being said, so 2 to 3 weeks. And also, as we get more testing, that number might change. As we get more data about how many people are infected and how many people are genuinely dying because of complications of this virus, then we'll have a more accurate number. And if it is to change in the future, understand that the 2 to 3 week number is a piece of provisional knowledge that is meant to change with better data's being available. So just hold that in mind. Uncertainty is a super uncomfortable thing to get comfortable with. But in the world of statistics, science, it's just like it's the air that you breathe. You have to be comfortable with uncertainty. Mm-hmm. That being said, should we be certain, you like that segue, that the information that was provided by these 3 articles is both reliable and valid? Mm. Somebody says no. That somebody is Anthony Fowler, who is like some no-joke professor at some no-joke university. Let me see.
I'm going to interrupt one more time. What's the difference between reliable and valid?
What's the difference between reliable and valid? Yes. So reliability has to do with being able to test and retest with getting within a very tight margin of error between tests. So that's reliability. And then validity means that the conclusions that you come to actually reflect in the real world. So there's such a thing as ecological validity that I have to deal with as somebody who studies psychology. Ecological validity means, is the thing that you saw in the lab a representation of what happens in the world? Because there are some phenomena that are lab specific, you know, especially in psychology, like when you're setting expectations. There's the white lab coat effect. And I take advantage of that because we do stress tests. Don't let me get off on a tangent on that. I love talking about stress. That being said, that's the difference. Validity are the claims mapping onto reality, and reliability is it consistent in the endpoints that it spits out with the same amount of input? Is its output the same as the let me phrase that. Is the output the same as the input when the input is the same over time? That would be reliability.
So in a simpler way, it's kind of like reliability is if you do the study again, how likely is it that you'll have the same result? Yes. And what was it? Validity is how confident can you be that you're actually studying something that's real in the real world, not just in the lab. Mm-hmm.
And also internal validity is, do your results actually have the associations that you discuss in your conclusions paragraph or your discussion paragraph? You know what I mean? Because you can be like, and my results that more people go to Disneyland than Disney World prove that global warming is a hoax. It's like, hold on a second, bud. Like your internal validity needs a little tweaking there.
So is it saying what you say it's saying? Do the numbers really? Yeah, that's exactly. Okay. So it can be valid, not reliable, or reliable and not valid, or it could be both or neither. So I just wanted to. All right. So
and it's important. It's important for instruments used in science to have high levels of reliability and validity. And and this goes from like legit, like physical objects, like a gas chromatograph, right? All the way to like instruments that are like quizzes, like intelligence tests. They need to be reliable over time. And we can talk about the Flynn effect all day, but again, don't let me go down that rabbit hole. But yes, reliability and validity are both used to determine methods, the integrity of methods, also the integrity of instruments used in collecting data.
Yeah.
All right, perfect. All right, so please continue. I just wanted to clarify that so that people who are listening are...
No problem. Hey, any excuse to fucking...
It's a dreaded question on the psychology tests, because in psychology courses and like social psych, people are like, is this validity or reliability? And it's like, God damn it, I don't remember. So now I got it, now that I'm out of school.
That's how you know you really have it, right? You've rehearsed it to the point where you could retrieve it. Excuse me. All right, so this guy, Anthony Fowler, he is the associate professor in the Harris School of Public Policy at the University of Chicago. So again, University of Chicago, big economics school. The author, the main economist from Freakonomics is from University of Chicago, I believe, or at least from a university in Chicago, because they're just known for their economic schools on economy. So that's this guy's bona fides, and he's like, the rush to publish findings quickly in the midst of the crisis does little for the public and harms the discipline of social science. He just fucking blows up the very idea that the things that I just reported from these 3 different articles even matter, right? It's the analogy for me is when looking, I'm going to bring up IQ scores again. Okay. When looking at IQ scores, it is a fact that you can point to that there are differences between genders, there are differences between races, but those aren't interesting questions to look at. Right? Like, you're missing the point of the intelligence test if you're trying to look at differences between group, because the fact is there's much more interesting differences within groups than between groups. That said, where was I going with that? Intelligence tests.
No, right before that, you were talking about he blew up. He had said that about the rush to yes.
So that's my analogy. In the same way that evidence about differences of groups in IQ is just not an interesting scientific question, this guy is pointing to the fact that, hey, those social science results that are being reported are not only not interesting, but actually cause damage to the discipline of social science. It's such a beautiful and refreshing angle to take, right? For me particularly, because I'm liberal, I'm progressive, I vote Democratic, I don't like Trump, I don't like Fox, I don't like Hannity. I would love for my confirmation bias to be satiated, you know what I mean? So it's nice to see something like this and take a step back and be like, oh, cool, I was victim to my own biases by wanting to look at these articles to see if they were legit.
Oh, and so I'm a big fan of any study that says you're wrong.
Yes.
Weren't
take it on board.
Weren't you yesterday like, wow, science has been producing all these results so rapidly during the COVID? Didn't you say something to that effect yesterday? I don't recall. I wasn't really listening to it.
I made a video. That was just like, bravo science for coming out with all of these peer-reviewed articles. Now, keeping in mind, those weren't social science articles. Those were like legit behavioral molecular biology articles about coronavirus and stuff. So thank goodness those peer-reviewed articles came out. These, on the other hand, yesterday we also talked about category error, I think. It might be incorrect to apply that. Okay. Thank goodness. You like that retrieval? Man, like an elephant, like a steel tank. Tank? Cage. More like a sieve. So yesterday we were talking about category error. It might be the case that articles coming out from science about a pandemic that's happening in real time might be more valuable in some areas of science than others. And I think that's this guy's argument. Like, social scientists, sit down and shut up. And this isn't the only slide. I break this guy's article down. So check this out. Okay. Because it's just so good, man. So check it. Oh, Peter. What's up, buddy? I see my buddy Peter in the side chat. Speaking of which, has there been anything going on in the side chat before I cover this?
It's been a little quiet, but actually, honestly, a lot of times that's a good sign. That means people are paying attention. So, and Peter has just become a member. So thank you very much, Peter. And we certainly appreciate the support.
And before we keep going, for the people that are watching this, if you dig it, please give it a thumbs up. If you don't dig it, give it a thumbs down, and then tell us why you don't dig it in the chat.
If you dig it, give it a thumbs up. If you don't dig it, we have a link to Christopher's channel. You can go to his channel over there, give that a thumbs down, and possibly unsubscribe. It's up to you. I'm not saying you should unsubscribe. What I'm saying is you should at least think about it.
It's like my Italian mother. She's like, yeah, I'll leave it up to you. I'm sure you'll make the right choice.
Exactly.
I mean, the choice is yours. I mean, you know what the options are. I'm sure you make the right choice.
Yeah, I mean, listen. It could be that I'm right. It could be that Christopher's wrong. We don't know which of the two it is. But
sarcasm is the lowest form of wit. You do realize that,
right? I do. That's why it's basically it's the only wheelhouse I've got. But please continue.
All right. So this guy, Anthony Fowler, he has what he sees as three concerning trends about the social science articles that are getting attention. Because like I said, it's not that they're all getting published. They're not all going through peer review. Some of them are still working papers. So his three main concerns are that many social scientists appear to be rushing their work. So in other words, it normally takes months of vetting your data, making sure that your statistical methods are solid, having people review it. And that takes months because people are busy, right? And it has to go to several different people. These are coming out in like days after the data has been collected.
Oh.
And also some of them are just relying on pre-existing data. So they don't really need to they don't need to wait for results of a survey that they sent out. They're just like taking data, like one of the studies yesterday from like Nielsen ratings, and then another from like, what is it, Smart Graph, which is GPS cell phone data, and then just running statistics on it. So there's that. And his second concern is that the temptation for social scientists to speak outside of the areas of expertise. I loved that one. He's pretty much saying, stay in your lane. Right, which is fantastic because to the public's eye, and this is a problem for science, and I may have mentioned it before, but because it is so counterintuitive from naive psychology or naive understanding of the world, right, science and scientific methods, it almost is like receiving wisdom from the oracles on Delphi, right? Like it's so separated from normal society, and that's a problem. But because of it, society kind of sees like, oh, well, you're a scientist, so therefore you know about all these things. Like for instance, there was a physicist, a Nobel award-winning physicist, who happened to be a racist. And he would like happily campaign for like, scientific racism of IQ differences between races. And the fucking public ate it up. But you take a step back and think about it, it's like, what the fuck does a physicist know about heredity or intelligence or psychological variables, period, right? Stay in your fucking lane is the point, which I love, in case you can't tell. Thank you for listening to my TED Talk. And then the third one is, never gets old. The third one is the temptation for social scientists to overclaim, which I think is fantastic. Like when a peer-reviewed scientific article targets one particular news network, that's suspicious. If we weren't in the middle of a pandemic and that article came out, people would be scratching their heads like, oh, that's a super specific target for this. You know what I mean? Like, why wouldn't you just take like the top 4 and compare, contrast? You know what I mean? It's just like, it just seems so targeted, agenda driven, I guess is the point here. And then he gives examples for at least the first point. He goes, and he refers specifically to the last 2 articles of the 3 articles that I covered. He's like, it's difficult to measure social distancing. He's like, if you try to get answers from a survey, people are horribly inaccurate at determining what their behaviors are, what their beliefs are, what they would do in a hot emotional state when they're in a cold emotional state. Their recollection of things is cobbled together from inaccurate recollections, right? So it's like, so if you do it via survey, you're going to get fucked up results. And also, if you look at the GPS data, that's also going to give you fucked up results too, because guess what? A lot of the stores that you would normally go to are closed. So you couldn't go to the normal, like it's not the same. It's not a level playing field. It's not like the baseline was stores were closed and maybe you didn't go to them versus stores are closed and maybe you didn't go to them after the COVID-19 was officially announced as a state of emergency. It's like, no, that's not what the case was. It was everything was open and then some things were open. So looking at cell phone data becomes suspicious from that angle, which is why I love this guy. He's just like, he's looking at the jewel from so many different facets. It's just so nice. And then the second point that he made is, even if we find differences along party lines, which is the point I just made about IQ, it's difficult to say whether this difference is explained by political attitudes or other factors, right? So this combines the correlation causation fallacy with the idea that there's more differences within groups than between groups.
Yeah.
And this is he's admitting like there might be third factors. It might be the case that a certain kind of temperament leans to this direction, which ends up in this behavior of watching this network. And that temperamental component is more explanatory of behavior than the fact that they watch Fox News. Maybe Fox News is the symptom, like a fever. That doesn't fucking explain anything because there are, what is that called? Multifinality. Multifinality is that, like many different things could lead to the same conclusion. And then equifinality is the same thing could lead to many different conclusions. But just the idea that, watching Fox News is a symptom of one thing, might not necessarily be true because there might be another thing like temperament. Like the example that I love is, and this is me going down a quick rabbit hole about correlation and causation. Motorcycle accidents are correlated very highly with people who have tattoos.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean that having tattoos makes the act of having tattoos makes you more likely to get into motorcycle accidents, or vice versa, that riding a motorcycle makes you more prone to get tattoos? No, there's a third variable, which is risk-seeking behavior. People with risk-seeking behavior get tattoos. They also happen to ride motorcycles. Having tattoos and riding motorcycles have nothing to do with each other, even though they're highly correlated with each other. That's kind of what I'm seeing here, which I just dig so much. Like, yeah, Fox News viewers are going to be Republican, and they're going to behave in a certain way. But these differences between Republicans and Democrats is just not an interesting question to answer, unless you have an agenda, unless you have a political agenda, in which case you're politicizing an area that should not be politicized, right? This is science is for everybody. We're supposed to be introducing information into the intellectual commons in as objective a way as possible. You know, research and development is science that is agenda driven. Right? That's not the shit that consumers should be, the public should be consuming. All right, I'm off my soapbox. And then I just have a couple more slides here. A couple more points that he made. Just
we dropped a link to the Discord, but last time we actually the Discord conversation kept going for about 5 hours after the show. So I know you and I left. Yeah, you and I left about an hour later. I came back 3 hours after we left. It was still going, and I checked on it an hour and a half after that. It was still going. So there was a lot of people having a good discussion in there for a while. So, but we will.
Agrippa had some great points, man.
Agrippa had some spectacular points, and he was there for at least 5 hours. He was there for 5 hours. It was, and he had some very good questions. He's thought about it. Yeah,
that was the most impressive part. Like, he was asking questions like a child. You know what I mean? Like, why is that?
I'll tell him you said that. Christopher Maddy said you're asking questions
saying
like
it publicly right now. I think that is a recipe for critical thinking. Ask questions like a child, but answer them like a lawyer. Like, that equals critical thinking, right? That's the equation from my perspective. So he was doing just that.
He was listening.
Why is it that Americans do this? What is this behavior? Why is this so specific to your culture? He was just asking like such great open-ended questions.
And active listening too, really active listening. So you'd give an answers like, that makes a lot of sense. Here's why, and here's why I might push back. And it was a good conversation. So we'll be continuing it. I don't know if he'll show up again today, but certainly I'll be there for afterwards. I hope you can join, and we will try to. Also, Courtney tried to join, but there were technical issues, and I was unavailable to help with it. And she was getting some help from some other people, and obviously we'll get it sorted. We'll get it sorted, but after the show we will be doing that again. So please continue, Christopher. Sorry for I do apologize.
Oh, good. I see that Floyd FP is in the house. He is the PowerPoint king. He just gave me the thumbs up. Gotta love people that present PowerPoints. Got that right.
We got to have him. We also got to have him on, especially to discuss, because he and I said this earlier. I did a debate with S.J. Thomason, which a number of people know about. But in preparation for it, because I prepared for a lot of. I was prepared for that debate, and I was prepared for a lot of avenues that we ended up not going in, and one of them was Daniel. And he did a video that I consider, I've seen a lot of work on to biblical interpretation. We've even had on Jim Majors, who really has done a lot of great work on biblical interpretation. But his work on Daniel is I think, of all the footage I've seen, Floyd FP's work on Daniel. I know he's done a lot of other stuff. That's all I really talk about, because that's most of what I've seen of his. It was just recommended to me. I think it was recommended to me by Aaron Ra. And because I had been talking to Aaron about it, and anyways, I think you should see it. We'll have. I'm going to ask Floyd to come on, and anyways, please continue. Now I'm doing the rabbit hole thing.
Oh yeah, I know it's horrible. You need to rein me in sometimes. All right,
I was supposed to do it. I made me kind of sad because I was supposed to do a beer crawl with him, with Aaron Ra and some other people local in Dallas, and obviously like. We couldn't do it with the coronavirus and everything, but we've talked about it. So we're gonna do a spicy food crawl and a beer crawl, and so we're gonna do it sometime.
We need to get Aaron back. I had a great time with Aaron, and we need to get Dill Hunty back for his deconversion story. But Aaron Ra's deconversion story was a lot of fun. So we gotta have Dill Hunty back, and we gotta have Ra back. But anyways, please continue.
All right, so let's just wrap this up. So this person, Anthony Fowler, who has a critique of the kinds of stories and specifically the articles that we covered over the past 2 days, he comes to these conclusions. Most of the work being done by social scientists on COVID-19, while interesting and important, is not urgent, which is just, I love it. I love it. The breath of fresh air comment just comes to mind. He's just like, take a breath, stop. Like, focus on your breath for the next 3 seconds. Understanding how political attitudes affect social distancing may be relevant for understanding things like political psychology, for example, and it might even help us design better solutions in a future pandemic. But it doesn't significantly benefit society to have this information right now. It's just like, who cares? Knowing that Fox viewers were later in compliance with social distancing a month ago. What the fuck? How does that help anyone right now?
Yeah.
So, last slide. Same thing as I said at the end of yesterday. Even if it is not the case that Hannity or Fox News viewership or Twitter activity, even if it's not the case that they're causing behaviors that make us more dangerous and have a higher propensity of getting the virus. Even if they're not doing that, there's still misinformation going on. So we can guard ourselves against that. And these are two of the points that were raised in the third article that I reviewed, saying misinformation is an important mechanism in driving the effects of the data. Maybe it's not, but misinformation is still something to address. And then finally, his results indicate that the provision of misinformation on mass media can have significant societal consequences. Whether that's true or not, it's worth knowing where reliable information is and how to access it. And so that's why I just have this infographic here. If you ever hear a piece of information and you don't quite know whether you should believe it or not, do a little research. Consider the source. Check your biases. Is it a consensus of experts or not? Is it a joke or not? All of those steps. So that's pretty much it. So now my question is, does anyone out there, or either you, Courtney, or Nick, think that, A, it's interesting whether or not Fox News or Hannity viewership changes behaviors in social distancing? And do you believe it's true? Do you think it's interesting to look at? And do you think that the conclusion of these articles have ecological validity? See?
Well,
I pulled back the ecological validity point from before.
I think that it has the potential to, I guess, call out the level of misinformation and the level of damage that it can and is causing. From Fox News, like from that place where people, like, for a very long time have known that this channel and this network almost proudly gives misinformation and has such a political skew. And I think it's, if nothing else, like, if it weren't true, I think that would be very damaging to the legitimacy of the social sciences. And as you were saying, it already kind of is damaging because it's showing that it's not something we should, accept on its own. It's something we need to kind of take with a grain of salt. But I do find it important to show the people in that network that what they're doing isn't victimless.
That's an interesting way of putting it.
Yeah, I'm inclined. I think it depends on what they say their goals are. But since they're called a news organization and they go by the name Fox News, I think you can judge the
fair and balanced. Isn't that their motto, or did they drop that?
I know. I think you can judge them based on the standards that they at least claim to hold. And as a news organization, that standard is, do they accurately convey important information to their audience? That is the goal of a news organization. They have to convey information. That information needs to be salient and it needs to be accurate. And the question is, how well have they achieved those three? And this would suggest to me that they're not achieving it particularly well. Now, there is something to be said for, different trends and what really is and isn't important. If it turns out that this kind of information on social distancing isn't all that important, then they've done a fine job. I think it is important. How much of my own bias do I have in that judgment? Well, probably some. In fact, I shouldn't say probably some, almost certainly some. But the truth is, if you take a look at when you accept as a premise that a healthy society is a goal all of us should be working towards, and then you take a look at these numbers that are coming in and what science tells us about how to lower these numbers, then I think it's a pretty easy jump from there to say that Fox News is failing at accurately giving news content that's important to their viewers to those said viewers. And then the next question in my mind, which hasn't been asked here, but is one I'm curious about, is how much are they more of an entertainment source that is masking as a news source, and how much are they aware of that, and or how much do they care, which I think speaks a little bit to what Courtney just said too. I mean, that's a good. Do they care? And if so, would this or anything else impact that?
I would call it more propaganda than entertainment. Because it has a clear agenda. And if they have, especially on like the Hannity show, if you have anybody who he might disagree with on the show, when he interviews them, if you watch the interview, it is incredibly disingenuous and skewed. The way that interview is presented, he will cut people off. He will mischaracterize them in a very obvious way. He will yell through what they're saying if they're saying something that is damaging to his agenda, and then he will cut the interview short. So it is very, very far from fair and balanced, especially on Hannity.
Now, Native Atheist actually just said something which I don't recall. I'm going to put that up here. Didn't Fox News and Court have to say that they weren't news but entertainment? That may be. I haven't heard of that. I vaguely remember something like that, but I don't know if I don't remember, but that's a good.
I think I've heard that too, but I don't know.
But it addresses the idea that, like, in a post-MTV world, infotainment is the direction that everyone's going in. I mean, think about just think about when CNN was covering elections and they had that hologram thing, networks are bending over backwards to make newscasts entertaining in a way that I don't think is necessary, right? Like either you're there listening to that news on that channel because you want to know the news, or you're not, right? It's not a matter of like bringing viewership in. Oh, this is how we're going to get the kids. We'll rap the news or what the fuck ever, right? It's just just deliver the news.
Yeah.
Deliver the fucking news, right? So
it's like I think that naked weather woman. I've heard of that. I don't know who did that, but there's some thing that people have seen of like a naked woman showing the weather, and it's like, what?
And I think it's just like people have a lower attention span, a smaller attention span.
For sure.
What?
So it's
attention span.
It's like pablum. They're just diluting the information into a digestible way, and unfortunately, a lot of people are fact intolerant, so they just have to package it in this sweet, gooey, glossy way that is easy to digest, and I think that's fucked. You know what I mean? Like why? That's why places like NPR get my respect, because it's a bunch of crotchety old hippies, doing a documentary on African swallows, or whatever. But it's like it's adults. It's adults having a conversation. They're having a conversation at the adult dinner table, right? They're not throwing food at each other. It's not a fucking fashion show. It's just news. You here for the news? Cool.
Well,
let's do news.
Here's the interesting thing, because I think news in this country would be very, very different. It was different. I really hate to, back in my day, in the good old days, but there was
three networks.
Well, it's not, but it wasn't the number of networks, although I think that did have an influence. But the airwaves in the U.S. are free. And it was decided that they belong to everybody, so anybody can use them and anybody can broadcast on them within certain restrictions. There's certain bans for public, certain bans for that companies can use. But the restriction was they had to do 1 hour every single day out of a 24-hour day, 23 hours. They could do whatever they wanted. 1 hour they had to do to social awareness, improving society, and that was the local news. That's where the news came in. They said, okay, at 6 p.m. we will do the news. And the rest of the time they could monetize it, and they made money off of it, and they made money off of advertising. It never crossed anybody's mind to try to make money off of that hour. But after, when it did start becoming so competitive, and with so many companies out there trying to compete for viewers, for eyeballs, and that you couldn't, if you weren't in news, you couldn't really, you didn't try competing on the news hour. That was just the vegetables everybody had to do in order to be able to use the airwaves. They had to give that hour. And then somebody said, wait a minute, why don't we, because we can't compete with other people for that hour. Everybody's hour is roughly the same, and it's just this news, and then the rest of the time we do the fun content. Why don't we try to make that fun too, and try to make it so people want to watch our hour over somebody else's hour, and let's try to sell advertising at that block too. And that's when people like Robin Mead started. Robin Mead. Oh God, I'm sorry. I have a thing about Robin Mead. It went south long before Robin Mead. But at any rate. I think that's and then people started saying, hey, wow, we could actually make money with news, which nobody tried to do before. And I think it has been and then
CNN, right? And so like the whole Stephen Jay Gould punctuated equilibrium model of evolution, thinking about news that way, CNN had been out for a while, but then the OJ trial came up. And then there was a need. There was all of a sudden a demand for a 24-hour news cycle in a way that didn't exist before. So it was just like, CNN exists, OJ, boom. Now that's the standard. Now everyone's looking for an OJ to cover wall to wall.
Yep.
And that was, I mean, and you saw it. It was like, it was as naked as like, how, so I'm going to age myself. So you remember Don Johnson from Miami Vice, right? He had the blazers with the rolled up sleeves. On every show after that, there were dudes with like those blazers with rolled up sleeves because everyone in the mall was wearing it and everything, right? As blatant as that was, networks looking for an OJ-like thing to cover wall to wall after the OJ, that happened. It was just like, what are you like? This is just you're making a mountain out of a molehill now. You're like, the OJ thing deserved a lot of attention because it was fucking crazy, right? It was a level of crazy that we had seen before, but we didn't have a 24-hour news cycle to cover it with. And now we did. And it's like, holy shit, the inner workings of these crazy fucking trials, right? But everyone loves seeing it because everyone's a voyeur to an extent. And so, that, I guess the take-home point is, for me, that was a tipping point in this infotainment, wall-to-wall, 24-hour news cycle existence that we currently have. And it wasn't always like this. It was not.
Yeah, and we've talked about that before, of the issue of people getting to pick and choose their news and not knowing how much of the news they pick is based on entertainment and propaganda versus sound investigative journalism. So the problem with that is, that earlier time of having like the news guy being somebody who was a trusted ethical journalist giving information, and everybody in the United States like listening to one source of that and agreeing on at least what the facts were of what was going on in the world, and not having so much of a bias skew. And I don't know how much of that like idealistic world was actually ideal, But it is unfortunate that we live in a time where you can get your news and your information from so many places, and there's no telling how much of someone's information is propaganda and targeted ads and things that look like news but aren't. And so we're not all looking at the same information, and we're not starting from the same level of what's factual and a basis of reality. We're operating on very different levels of reality based on what our algorithms give us. And so it's that's where a lot of our divisiveness comes from, because if you are in your own echo chamber and you look at another political side, you feel like they're just complete, insane idiots. Like, don't you see the reality of what's going on? And the other people are looking at you the same way because they're looking at very different information.
So that raises the question for me, and I know that we're at the 1 hour mark, and I don't know how much longer you want to go, but this question kind of cuts to, from my perspective, the heart of what you were just talking about, and that's, so how do we view the general public? Do we view them as smart enough to take news consuming into their own hands and trust that they will get good enough information, or are they not very smart? And they kind of need to be reminded of what reliable sources are. And maybe there needs to be a little control or regulation over information provided, either in commercials. I have a whole spiel about how fucking commercials should be fact checked. Or news, right? Because then the question becomes, well, who gets to decide?
Well,
at what point does that become propaganda?
I like the question, but I don't agree that it's a choice between, are they smart enough to know or are they not smart? Because the problem is that the time between the anchor newsman, where you get all your information from one person, and now is not that much time. And there are people who grew up with that and still see the nightly news on their local news as that, as reliable, as ethical journalism. And so I think, even adults of all ages, and I think even children, there have been studies of not being able to tell the difference between news and an ad. And so I think it takes an education of teaching people the world that we live in now, of how you vet information. Because I think people are smart enough. And I think people, if they understood the stakes of what it is, I think they might be more willing to take the time to vet information. But I don't think the majority of people have been given that information of, this really is a targeted ad. This really is biased information. This really is propaganda. And you can't trust how it's framed.
But this is the fourth time this week this topic has come up between me and friends and acquaintances. The idea that what people consider research, right? This topic, because my best friend Keith, yes, and I'm a middle-aged man with a best friend. And you'll probably hear, like, if you let me talk long enough, he will pop up in conversations many times. He and I had a conversation about it because he has friends, and he is a very hands-on worker. He has his own business. He makes tiny houses, lives out in Eugene, Oregon. So he's not like the academic guy, but he loves talking about these kinds of things, and he's hyper intelligent. Also, I was in a band with him when I was 16. So that aside, he and I were talking about it because he's like, what the fuck why do people keep saying they're doing research when they're not? He's like, explain to me what research is. I was like, all right, so here's the problem, right? People go to a fucking garbage in, garbage out machine like Google. They type in loaded questions and they just get confirmation bias slathered, in every fucking page that comes up. As compared to actual research, where you are trained to go against your instincts, to look at the information and from the synthesis of that information draw a conclusion, instead of having a conclusion that wags the dog, so to speak, and drives the kind of questions that you ask. It's knowing what reliable sources are. It's knowing what integrity is. If it's a news source, do they make mistakes? Of course they're going to. You should expect that. Do they correct the mistakes?
Yeah.
Do they make it public? Is it at the bottom of every article they made a mistake in, that mistakes were made and that they had to correct them and what the mistake was and how they corrected it? If that's the case, then fuck yeah, make mistakes. It's cool. You're humans. It's an imperfect system. I'm not going to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. But you have to have criteria as to what qualifies as a reliable source. And fucking, like people in my family, like my sister-in-law, she and I were having a discussion about something. She's like, oh, well, I did research on this. And I, as a researcher, I was just like, oh yeah, what kind of research did you do? Keeping in mind, nothing against my sister-in-law, but she's not a researcher. She's like, yeah, I went to this website. And I was like, what website was that? She's like, Natural News, Dr. Mercola. I was like, I can immediately dismiss everything that's about to come out of your face. She's like,
Yeah.
And she was like, no, that information isn't always wrong. And I was like, yeah, but a broken clock is right twice a day. So like that's not a justification for
that information is not always
wrong. This fucking website is.
That doesn't instill confidence. They're not always wrong.
Yeah. But it's an empowering, I can see from her perspective that it was empowering. Look, I have a website that validates the claim that I'm making. Like, I've done research. I'm pointing to a reference. Unfortunately, to people who actually do research, what is happening is you're taking the observable symptoms of what a research does and does them without the foundational understanding of why those techniques are being used and how to use them appropriately. You know what I mean? Yeah. So people are like, yeah, I researched this and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, come on. Oh, I have a theory about why they're not together. No, you don't. You have a hypothesis about why they're not together. Like, come on. Like, what are we doing? Are we using technical language or not technical language? If we're going to use colloquial language, fine. Then I'm going to be much more fast and loose with how I interpret what you say and what I say. But if you're going to start taking yourself seriously and you want to use technical language, all right, well, now there are rules. And I happen to know them. So, like, if you want to have this conversation, the conversation I invite you to is a good faith, level-headed conversation where we acknowledge certain things. And, it's very difficult to have that with people who take themselves seriously because they've done research online. And research online, like I said, is just fucking putting loaded questions into a garbage in, garbage out machine.
And I have friends I have one friend that I went to high school with. She was my best friend in 6th grade. And it's elementary school and junior high. And she went somewhere else after high school. I hadn't seen her in a long time. She was homeless for a while. She was in drugs and stuff. And then she had kids, and now she has 5 kids. And her 3rd child had a allergic reaction to some sort of vaccine thing. And then now she is a anti-vax advocate or a activist. And when I talked to her about it, she talked about Facebook articles, Facebook ads, and things that she learned on Facebook. And it was just, it punched me in the gut. But so her 2 smallest children are not vaccinated at all. She refuses to do that. Her first 2 children are, because that was before this child had some sort of allergic reaction. She had like a fever or something, and the doctors weren't very clear with her about what was going on, and she didn't believe them. But she has all these conspiracy theories about the government, and it kind of snowballs into this distrust of all kinds of things, pharmaceutical companies and everything. And so she had a lot to say about that. But it took something that happened to her personally, that she had a targeted question that she came to the internet to answer about her child's experience. And then it brought her into this propaganda, world of a bunch of targeted ads on Facebook. And in her mind, she's done the research by doing Facebook articles. And it just baffles.
All right. Well, what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to start wrapping this up, and then like I said, we will continue this on Discord for anybody who would like to join us there. But before we go, was there anything else that you wanted to just bring up that you're going to be doing, Christopher, anytime soon that you want to let people know about? Or
yeah, so this is one of the few instances where I actually have something to promote. So I'm going to be on ProLib's show in 2 weeks, I think. He's doing a series called The Requiem for the GDC, the Great Debate Community, which, being an old guard, member of the old guard, I remember it. And so I would like to share my experiences with it. It should be fun. And I think it's particularly pertinent to the way that we ended this conversation with people having a difficult time determining what is a good source, human propensity to be tribal. To me, the way that we talk about that in politics is very much what happens online. And that's why I use the analogy of the octagon, right? Most of the activity online is the octagon. And I prefer a dinner table approach where we can disagree without being disagreeable in a good faith conversation. And so that was my approach to the great debate community back in the day. And so that's what I'm going to be covering with ProLib in a couple of weeks. So that's that.
Very nice. Well, and ProLib is not only a friend of the show, but he's actually the co-host of Overtime. So, it's bouncing around. So that's perfect. All right. Well, perfect. Well, Courtney, was there anything that you wanted that you're going to be doing that you wanted to bring up or anything like that?
My schedule is known way more by you than by me. So you can tell the people what we're doing coming up, because that's all I got going on.
Well, let's see. As I said before, we're going to be doing the Second Amendment discussion with Xandering, and then and that's actually just going to be a discussion, I think, just between him and I. But then we're going to be doing, you and I are going to be hosting, like I said, Dr. Carrier and Ozzy for the philosophy of religion. So I think I'm looking forward to that. And then there are a couple of other things that we're like in the process of booking that aren't actually on the calendar yet, but we'll update people on our Discord when we know more about that, or on our next show we'll update people. And I'm hoping, like I said, we've got to do the news is just unfortunately it's just getting, as I think most people know, very, very bad. So we're going to try to do also a news update at some point very soon, covering what's been happening in particular with the COVID numbers and what's happening in this country and where the projections are, because they're getting really quite bad.
Man, Courtney, you let your co-host talk a lot.
Yeah. Courtney runs the show, but I do 95% of the talking. So, all right. Well, thank you once again.
Why do I have a feeling that applies to every fucking area of your life, Nick?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love you, Nick. You've been talking to my wife. You've been talking to my wife, haven't you? I know what that call was earlier. Now I know.
I heard it from a little birdie. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Oh, she'll tell anyone who asks. The other thing she'll say is, "Hey, if you can get him to do 5% of the work, it's a good day." Yeah. All right. Well.
Less than chance.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us, and we appreciate you guys coming here. Thank you, Christopher, for coming back for a second time. Obviously, you didn't learn your lesson the first time. I don't know what happened there, but I'm glad we managed to get you to come back. If you like the show, please do like and subscribe. And also, we do have a Patreon hangout this Monday. So Monday, we're going to have a Patreon hangout. I'm going to see, hopefully Courtney can make it. Hopefully Ethan can make it. I will be there for the people who support the show, which we really appreciate, because we are, of course, supported by our patrons. And then, like I said, we will be carrying this on in the Discord afterwards. So we'll see you all there in a few minutes. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
And I do have one problem. So we changed the interface here. So I'm just trying to catch up with. There we go. Nope, that's not right.
Do I need to vamp?
No, I'm going to need
clean joke and dirty joke. Which one do you want to hear? No. Okay.
No, whichever. I will let you surprise me.
Okay, I'll use my go-to clean joke. Oh man, people back in the day have heard these so many times. That's ridiculous. But I love the fact that it's a revolving door policy on the internet. So little Johnny's having a problem at school. And the principal can't determine what the problem is, so they call the parents in with the school psychologist. So the school psychologist wants to determine just how smart Johnny is, so he draws 3 trees on the board, and he goes, so what does this equal? This plus this equals what? And Johnny goes 9, without skipping a beat. Psychologist is very confused, says, okay, maybe he doesn't recognize that they're trees. I'm going to draw a little dirt underneath each one. He's like, okay, let's try this again, Johnny. That plus that plus that, what does that equal? Without skipping a beat, Johnny goes 99. School psychologist is super confused, so he's like, maybe he still doesn't recognize that they are trees, so I'm going to draw a little dog turd underneath each one. And so he goes, all right, Johnny, let's try this again. This plus this plus this, what does it equal? Johnny looks at it and he goes, that's definitely 100. School psychologist looks at the parents, throws his arms up. He goes, what's going on? Johnny, the answer to this question is 3. This 1 plus 1 equals 3. He goes, that's not how I see it. Tree plus tree plus tree is 9. Dirty tree plus dirty tree plus dirty tree is 99. And dirty tree and a turd and dirty tree and a turd and dirty tree and a turd equals 100. It's my go-to clean joke.
Completely over my head, I will confess.
Over your head?
Oh, yes, over my head.
Have you not met anyone from Jersey? They pronounce the word 3 like tree.
Tree plus tree plus tree is 9. Oh, God.
Dirty tree plus dirty tree plus dirty tree. Dirty tree and a turd, dirty tree and a turd. Oh, mother. I've never had to explain that joke ever in my life.
I should have. Okay, now, well, thank you for shaming me. I'm sitting there trying to get the credit scroll to work.
Mike from Jersey. Mike from Jersey is in the side chat. Mike from Jersey is in the side chat.
You come onto my show, make me look bad. I got it. No, it's fine. Just keep talking. We all, just keep talking. Yeah, he's talking over me. I don't know what. Go ahead, Chris. Go ahead. We all want to hear you. Go on. We want to hear you. It's your opportunity.
Are we still broadcasting?
Yeah. Okay, fine. All right, thank you all for joining us. We're good. See you guys next time. Thank you.